Hello there and a very good evening. This is Vantage Point. I'm Sonali Vanikabadage. Earlier this week, the world commemorated May Day, or International Workers' Day. What significance does it hold to Sri Lanka? Let's find out. We are joined by political scientist and former diplomat, Dr. Dian Jayatillaka. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Sonali.
And thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
If we take the origins and the history of International Workers' Day, it really saw its origins in Chicago as far back as 1886. But if we fast forward a couple of years, centuries really, we see political parties taking to the streets. How has this evolution really happened, and do you think a real International Workers' Day is being marked?
Well, the evolution is fairly old. What happened was that the workers organized for their rights, the right to organize, to have a work day that was reasonable and for reasonable wages, and they were met more often than not with force, often with deadly force. Now the next stage, which was towards the end of the 19th century and the beginnings of the 20th, was that the workers decided that they needed political formations to fight for their rights, because the legislation that impacted on them was made by governments. So they needed to get into the political arena, and that is how you saw the beginning of labor parties. You had the British Labour Party. In Ceylon as well, by the way, you had the Labour Party led by Mr. A.E. Gunasinghe.
Right.
Then you had the European equivalent of the British Labour Party. Actually, the Europeans started a little before. Those were called the Social Democratic parties. Now, these parties, the Labour parties and the Social Democratic parties, are parties that were undergirded by trade unions. The British Labour Party was formed by the trade union movement. The Social Democratic parties had a more interactive relationship with the trade unions. So, what I'm getting at is that International Workers' Day has been politicized for over a century, and that won't go away. The reason it's politicized is that it was deemed necessary. It was felt that the workers needed political clout. They needed either to form their own parties or to align themselves with some other progressive or left of center or far left or populist parties, as in Argentina, for instance, the Peronist movement, sure, which would give them more space and fight against political parties and governments that were heavily weighted in favor of the owners, especially foreign capital. So it was a kind of a left-right divide, though now, right now, you see something new. For instance, most of the workers in the United States seem to have voted for Donald Trump rather than for the Democrats. They used to vote for the Democrats. And in France, it looks like some of the workers are drifting towards Marine Le Pen. Now, the reason is that there are new phenomena which are cutting across the right-left ideological divide, and those phenomena are to do with the global economic order and economic policies. So the workers are now tending to line up with those who are critical of what's known as neoliberal globalization, i.e. globalization which means no borders, free flow of capital, free flow of labor, which tends to affect the workers in those countries. Now the American workers say, hey, our factories have gone to low wage areas in Latin America. In Europe they say, the British, that's one of the reasons for Brexit, they say cheap labor has come over from Eastern Europe and it's taking our jobs and is driving wages down. So this again is new. It's workers identifying not with left parties but sometimes with what are known as alt-right, alternative right parties, which are taking a very nationalist stance. But the basic point I'm trying to make is, from early in the 20th century, International Workers' Day has been a political phenomenon.
Doctor, you spoke about the alt-right movement. Now, doesn't this also have with it undertones of racism and xenophobia?
Yes. Yes, it does. But it's all alt these days. You know, you've got the alt-right, which is not the old conservative elitist right. You've got the alt-left, like Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, not the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party candidate, Benoit Hamon, got 6% of the vote. The Socialist Party was the party in governance. It was President Hollande's party. President Hollande is still the president of France. His candidate got 6%, but the alt-left candidate got 19-point-something%. And you have the alt-center, Emmanuel Macron. Macron is described as a radical centrist or an extreme centrist. His party is only 1 year old. En Marche. It started in 2016. So why do we have all these alternatives, alt-left, alt-right, alt-center? It's because people are reacting against the establishment. And the establishment is seen as a neoliberal, globalized establishment. So they're reacting in different ways. They're coming at it from the far left, they're coming at it from the far right, and they're coming at it from the far center.
So we saw this taking place in the United States of America, with people rejecting the establishmentarian order. However, that really hasn't seemed to work out thus far.
Well, we don't know, because you'll have the midterm, you'll have the elections in the congressional elections. Right now, Trump's support among his supporters is high, among his supporters, among the Republicans. And the Republicans are still loyal to him. They have not defected. And he's still there. You also have it in Britain. You have Brexit. And you have Prime Minister May gambling on that and going for a snap election. She's doing that because she thinks that the majority of British voters continue to believe that they should exit the European Union. And she wants to cash in on that, which means she thinks that this wave of populist nationalism is still flowing in Britain, and she wants to ride that wave. So we'll have to see how it goes. I think she may be proven right. The opinion polls show that Prime Minister Theresa May is ahead. And then you have left populism, the Ecuadorian elections. The former vice president, who was the vice president under Rafael Correa, who's the left-wing president of Ecuador. He's also a paraplegic. He fought the election he's like Roosevelt. He's a left-wing Roosevelt. His challenger was a big business guy, a free trade guy, and the left candidate representing the government won. So it's a kind of a left populist wave there. You don't have any place really that the establishment is winning. Even when the establishment, the liberal establishment wins or looks like it's winning, it has to distance itself. Look at Emmanuel Macron in France. He keeps saying, look, I'm an outsider. I mean, he's not an outsider, he's a banker. He's also a friend of, he also worked in the Élysée Palace under Hollande. But he has successfully reprofiled himself as, I'm not one of these guys. I don't have a political party. I have a new movement. I'm different. I'm married to my teacher, 20-odd years older than I am. I'm hip. So every successful candidacy is having to rebrand itself as something different from the establishment, and the establishment is seen as one of neoliberal globalism, and that's not working anymore.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We are in conversation with political scientist Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka. After this commercial break, we'll move on to the situation in Sri Lanka. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is a Vantage Point. We're in conversation with political scientist and former diplomat Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka. Dr. Jayatillaka, we saw over 15 different rallies across the island on the 1st of May. We had the SLFP rally with massive crowds, the UNP rally again with phenomenal attendance. We also saw, interestingly, the joint opposition, the Podujana Eksath Peramuna, headed by former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, also with a gargantuan crowd, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna and different other parties as well, the TNA on the one hand. We saw a rally in Jaffna with Chathura Senaratne and Dr. Rajitha Senaratne as well. What's your take on this? The massive crowds at all of these rallies.
Well, May Day has always been big in Sri Lanka. It's always been the place and the time where you calculate the relative strengths of the parties, who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out, who's on the way in, who's on the way out. May Day has always been big. I mean, I remember May Day 1976, where the UNP in opposition pretty much filled Goldface Green, and 1 year later they were in office. So May Day is significant. It's not something that can be dismissed. And I think that what we saw on Goldface Green this year was almost certainly the largest May Day rally ever in Sri Lanka's political history. I mean, it can be calculated. You've got the footage, you've got the still shots, you've got newspaper reports, and I don't think there's ever been anybody who succeeded in turning that place into a sea of heads. I mean, 2 people died because they were so tightly packed.
That was at the joint opposition, right?
Yeah. They had a little car park area in front of the Goldface Hotel, but the rest of Goldface Green right up to the breakwater it was like a carpet of curly hair. That's all you saw, because I was watching it from home. That's what you saw. I don't think there's ever been. I think it's pretty clearly the biggest May Day rally ever.
So, Dr. Jayatillaka, what does this really signify, and what does this really augur about the future?
Well, in the first place, by definition, those guys are not the government. So, they didn't have the resources of government to pack Goldface Green, and it's not easy even for government to pack Goldface Green. Secondly, they're not even the recognized opposition. The recognized opposition is the TNA, followed by the JVP. And if there's one thing that Goldface Green proved, it's that's the opposition. I mean, they're so huge. There's no question as to what the main opposition is, and possibly, I mean, it's very clear that they are contenders, very serious contenders for power, because you can't mobilize that kind of crowd and people don't stay. I mean, there was no entertainment. I've seen the UNP, not in 76, which was a serious May Day, but I've seen the UNP from 77 filling Goldface Green by getting Hindi singers. There were no singers. I mean, there was one guy who sang. This was a very political thing. Everybody stayed till it was over, and the whole thing was like a carpet. So the JO, yes, and the new party, but it was mainly the JO and Mahinda. They are very serious political players. I mean, there's no question about it. They're knocking at the door. You
said something interesting. You said the joint opposition doesn't have the resources to pack a crowd. So what does it really take? Does it take a packet of rice and a bottle of arak? What does it really take to get the crowds?
Anybody, I mean, if it's a packet of rice and a bottle of arak, the other guys have more money. They're in office. I mean, an unkind person would say they've also got the bond scam money. But even if you set that aside, they've got the money as the government, at least the UNP, to give the packets of rice and the booze. The opposition, and these fellows are not even, the JO is not even the recognized opposition. So what it means is emotion. Emotion. They were just motivated. I mean, you don't stay there so tightly packed for hours. You drift, but you stay there if you're motivated. And these are hardcore. I mean, this is a growing movement. I mean, it's a big movement. It's a big movement, and it's what you see in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, in Greece, in Italy, in France, they don't come for packets and food and booze. They come because they are motivated. They feel strongly about something, or they feel strongly for somebody, or they feel strongly against something or somebody. It's the collective emotions that make people mobilize, come together, like the demonstrations against Donald Trump the day after the inauguration. I mean, you had all the big women's march. That's because they felt strongly. Obviously, the joint opposition and the new party were able to strike that chord, which got, as I said, almost certainly the largest ever crowd that arrived at a May Day demonstration in Sri Lanka.
Let's also talk a bit about the SLFP rally headed by President Maithripala Sirisena, who incidentally was handed over the chairmanship by former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. There were significant crowds there as well, and he is very much the leader of both the party and the country. And until 2020, we're looking at President Maithripala Sirisena as the president.
2019.
And Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe as
no, not
the Prime Minister.
No, because constitutionally, President Sirisena is the president for a 5-year term according to the 19th Amendment. And the 19th Amendment specifically says that it includes the present incumbent. So that means that he was elected in January 2015. 5 years from January 2015 is January 2020, but the Constitution also says that you have to hold your election 1 month before your term of office ends.
Sure.
So that's December 2019. It's end 2019. So President Sirisena is president till end 2019. The Prime Minister is Prime Minister till whenever President Sirisena says he is Prime Minister. There's no guaranteed time frame on who the Prime Minister is. The Prime Minister is the person that the President thinks commands the majority of the House. Now, when he first made Mr. Wickremesinghe Prime Minister, Mr. Wickremesinghe had about 40 seats. That's in 2015 after the presidential election. He manifestly didn't command the majority of the House. So, Mr. Wickremesinghe's tenure is, as was evident in 2003, because in 2003, President Kumaratunga took away 3 portfolios from from Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, and then went on in 2004 to remove him from office and call for elections. So there's no certainty that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe will be the Prime Minister. For instance, if in August, when the MOU between the SLFP and the UNP ends, the SLFP does not renew, then President Sirisena has other options. He's got 50 people he knows who may not like him right now, but these are his old comrades in the joint opposition, and he's got 45 with him. That's the 95 SLFP people who were elected in August 2015. Now, they may not all owe loyalty to him. The 50 might say, sorry, we don't have anything to do with you. But we don't know that. He has options. He can work various permutations and combinations. There may be, and there are very likely to be, at least a few dozen UNP MPs who are happier with him than with the Prime Minister. So it will all depend on how things are going. And President Sirisena, being a shrewd political operator and having been the SLFP's General Secretary and having had to mobilize Mayday crowds for much of his political life, he knows what the JO's massive crowd at Golfest Green means. It means they have traction. Now he's going to wonder, now what do I do? Obviously they're not going away. They're growing bigger. So do I take my bunch of 45 guys and put them together with these guys, or do I send them from government to opposition in order to grow as an opposition, so maybe they can negotiate with the JO, or do I keep them in government? And if I keep them in government, will they keep dissolving, because they're obviously not the majority of the divided Sri Lanka Freedom Party when you take the numbers on May Day. So he's got a lot of thinking to do after what happened on May 1st, and I'm sure he's thinking it through.
All right. What is the role of the UNP, and what of the JVP and the TNA? We'll find out after this short commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Vantage Point. Dr. Dhananjaya Tilaka, we were speaking about the decision making that vests in the hands of President Maithripala Sirisena. Now, what role does the UNP play here, and also the Janatha Vimukti Peramuna, as well as the TNA, the Tamil National Alliance? How do they fit into this equation?
Well, let's start from the last, the TNA. The TNA now has to recalculate, and it has to calculate that if it pushes for a new constitution rather than an amendment, which is modest enough to be carried by only a 2/3 and which does not require a referendum. Those are the two options before the TNA. Now, if it pushes for a new constitution or an amendment of such magnitude that it requires a referendum, it has to calculate that that political army that was lined up on Golfest Green is going to go out and campaign against. And in a global situation in which no government wins a referendum, there is a very high probability that this government will lose. So the TNA and the UNP have to rethink the whole idea of a new constitution and a referendum. Unfortunately, well, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, but looking at it from the country's point of view, as I try to, unfortunately, the UNP at its May Day reiterated its decision to drive forward towards a new constitution. The Prime Minister said the draft will be ready in 2 or 3 months. They will go for a referendum. Ajit P. Pereira said they'll go for a referendum. Rajitha Senaratne said they'll go for a referendum. Now, look, I've been on the other side of a referendum. I was one of those who was calling for no vote. I just come back, from the United States, where I was a Fulbright scholar doing my PhD, 1982 December. And the opposition, we lost. But that opposition was very weak. Nothing like what you see now. So I think the TNA will have to rethink this. It can still have an improvement on what exists by stopping at an amendment which has the support of all parties in Parliament. The 19th Amendment had all parties in Parliament supporting it. There was no need for referendum. It was a fairly serious amendment, and it worked. Now, is the TNA ready to do this? Has it taken into account Golfest Green? The UNP made, if I may say so, two mistakes. One was the General Secretary of the UNP, whom I regard as a friend, Mr. Kabir Hashim. The night before the May Day, he went on television and said the joint opposition's May Day, the way they placed the platform, is only 1/3 of Golf-Face Green, and if that's what they want to do, we could have given them the Visakha Vidyalaya school playground. Well, the JO, I think he got the car park mixed up with what the JO had planned for the rally, because there was a little car park area at the back of the stage. And today, he really has to take a look at the photographs, and the UNP has to understand how an opposition, which is not even supposed to be the opposition, is not recognized in Parliament as the opposition. It can't give jobs. How is it that they've grown to this extent? And they've grown because of the policies of the UNP. The second thing is, the UNP has done something which is almost miraculous. You can't really do that kind of thing. It's brought the JO, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and the JVP, which hates Mahinda Rajapaksa, together in the trade union movement. And on the night of May Day, you had a very interesting debate where you had Vasudeva Nanakara and Lal Kanta, the leader, the trade union leader of the JVP. They both had successful meetings, and they came into a television studio. And they were both saying sort of the same thing on some questions. Lal Kanta was very, very hostile to the idea of Mr. Sarath Fonseca, Field Marshal Fonseca, being given some new posts. And he said, don't these guys have any sensitivity to, they actually said this 2 days before May Day. I mean, why didn't they wait till after May Day to say they're just cheesing people off? So, the JVP and the JO, which normally does not get together on anything, is being driven together by the economic policies of the UNP as well as the tough talk that Champika Ranawaka, Rajita Senaratna, he named them, and Sarath Fonseca are engaging in. So it looks like, at least in the field of trade union activity, the JO and the JVP unions will get together and fight against the government on Trincomalee and privatization, and that's something new. I think the UNP has to rethink its strategy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dayan Jayathilaka, political scientist and former diplomat, joining us on this edition of Vantage Point. That wraps up this edition. We'll see you again in exactly 2 weeks from now. Good night.